Balls. Balls. Balls are an important, sensitive, and essential piece of our equipment, but they do get old and sloppy and require some delicate care and maintenance. So let's smash them with a hammer until they fall off and replace them with better ones. Our MX-5 Miatas have double wishbone suspension all around, and as we're driving down the road, there's a lot of forces acting upon it. Those control arms are constantly moving up and down over bumps and loading up as we turn, and the things that allow the steering knuckle to pivot and articulate with the control arms at the same time are the ball joints. Also, the outer tie rod ends provide a connection from the steering system to the spindle, allowing us to turn the wheels and thus steer the car. So, armed with that understanding, let's get started. This is the front left corner, and let's get the old lower ball joints and tie rod ends off the car. With the front lifted off the ground, we disconnect the sway bar end link and remove the lower shock bolt. Now's a pretty good time to note that we aren't changing out the upper ball joints, as these are still pretty good. Typically though, we would need to change out the whole arm as the ball joint is pressed in, but replacements are available from Flying Miata or Super Miata if you feel so inclined. And now we can remove the cotter pins from the tie rod end and the lower ball joint. Next, we loosen the castle nuts, but leave them threaded on slightly. And whale on this exact spot with a hammer to release the tie rod end's tapered stud from the spindle. Now we do the same for the lower ball joint, but it doesn't seem to release as easy, so in goes the ball joint separator. Back to the tie rod end, we can now loosen the jam nuts slightly, which needs a bit of help with my creme brulee lighter. That's off. Then we spin off the tie rod end. The best practice here is to count the number of turns to get the old one off and reinstall the new one using the same number of turns, but we'll get to that in a moment. I also removed the lower control arm to do poly bushes, but you can install the lower ball joint with it attached to the chassis. You know, an awesome way to help support me and the channel, besides liking, subscribing, and commenting, is to watch this whole video right to the end. That tells the YouTube algorithm that you like what you see and you think the video deserves more views. Can you do that? Thanks, man. You're the best. Over on the bench, here's what the lower control arm looks like, and here's where the lower ball joint lives. It's held in by one through bolt and a bolt on the rear tab. And after cleaning up the arms, instead of installing OEM replacement lower BJs, we got these. These are Bauer Limited Production extended lower ball joints, and they're an upgrade that allows an additional 2 to 3 degrees of negative camber and also gives you additional coilover spring to wheel clearance. They've got a forged body and include new castle nuts and cotter pins. In case you're worried about the quality of non-OEM suspension components, these are NASA Spec Miata approved and ISO 9001 certified. More than good enough for me. We also have a pair of OEM Mazda made in Japan R-Package tie rod ends. These were introduced with the 1993 LE model and used in 94 to 97 R-Package cars, as they came from the factory slightly lower than the standard models. The stud is 3/16 of an inch, or about 5 millimeters longer, and compensates for that dreaded bump steer on reasonably lowered cars. Alright, let's get this installed in here. This is super simple. Get the ball joint into position, a little anti-seize to help future me, torque to spec, and do the same for the other side. Now over on the car, let's install the new R-Package tie rod end. We spin it on using the same number of turns as before. While I do that, let's take a brief aside to get a simple working understanding of what bump steer is and why it's bad. Bump steer is when the wheel's toe angle changes without any steering input as the suspension moves through its range of travel. Like when you go over a bump, it steers, and that sucks. This happens because the travel arc of the control arms and the tie rod ends aren't perfectly aligned, making the car feel unpredictable and skittish. And it's typically made worse by lowering your car. Good thing these Mazda R-Package rod ends fix this on all but the most excessively lowered Miatas. Anyways, let's tighten up this jam nut. Just just like that, our R-Package tie rod end is installed. And now for me, I refit the lower control arm. Swing the arm up and get the ball joint into the knuckle with a castle nut. Then get the tie rod end onto the spindle with its castle nut. Now we can reinstall the lower shock mount bolt, torque everything up to spec, and install those cotter pins. They look a little weird, huh? With the car reassembled and back on the road, as mentioned in my last video, I take the car for a professional laser alignment at a local Toronto tuner shop. Alright, so here we are after the alignment's finished. I don't really know these guys enough to be allowed access into their shop to show you a video of it, but regardless, it's not work that you can generally do yourself, or unless you have a laser alignment machine. You could do the string method. But anyway, so here we are back in the car, and I'm interested to see how this thing feels with a proper alignment. Alright, so here we go. Feels so much better. So I'll flash up the alignment spec sheet here and take a look at some of these numbers. When I brought the thing in, I think I had a little bit of toe in the front. Okay, yeah, even just putting around from stoplight to stoplight, oh man, this thing feels so good. It's right about here that I stop saying anything meaningful, so allow me to sum up a few thoughts after getting the alignment done. Anytime we touch the suspension bits on our car, it's highly recommended to get an alignment, especially when we mess with those lower control arm eccentric bolts. In fact, their whole deal and reason for existing is to be the adjustment points for our alignment. Now, if you've been following the channel, you probably noticed that in the last 3 videos, we basically overhauled the entire suspension with new coilovers, poly bushings, and now new ball joints and tie rod ends. In hindsight, I probably should have replaced the upper ball joints to complete the refresh, so maybe that'll be a future video. But back to the driving experience, I'm not really pushing the limits of grip in this stop-and-go traffic. However, I am happy to report the car is acceptably compliant and squeak-free, and I trust those tie rod ends are taking care of that whole bump steer thing. Also, those extended lower ball joints have allowed for more negative camber than before at 3.2 degrees versus 2.5, and we can go even further to -4 degrees and beyond if the need arises. I can't wait to get this car on track again to test out the brand new suspension setup and see if all these parts do more than just make my wallet lighter. But before we get there though, let's bring it back into the garage. So are these extended lower ball joints and longer tie rod ends a must-have mod for your Miata? Well, if you're in the market to replace them anyways, then spending a little bit extra will allow you to lower your Miata without worrying about that troublesome bump steer. And you also get a touch of extra adjustability to dial in that sweet, sweet negative camber, which is kind of important if you're chasing your new personal best at your local road racing facility. Alternatively, if you're more of a wine and cheese tour kind of Miata driver, then these are totally unnecessary and frankly offensive. So that's a wrap on lower BJs and outer TREs. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share the channel with your friends. Until next time, you're awesome. I'm mostly useless. Thanks very much for watching.